The ocean is one of the last true frontiers on Earth, a place as mysterious as the surface of the moon, as unforgiving as outer space, and as deadly as any battlefield in history. It has swallowed ships, submarines, entire civilizations. It has taken explorers, treasure hunters, and divers who dared to challenge its depths. It does not forgive mistakes. It does not give second chances. And yet, there are those who make the ocean their workplace. These men, saturation divers, are some of the most highly trained, highly paid, and highly endangered professionals on Earth. Their job? To descend into the darkest, coldest, most crushing depths imaginable, where no human was ever meant to survive, and do the impossible. Repair, maintain, and build the vast underwater structures that keep the modern world running. You may not see them, but you depend on them. Every time you turn on a light, drive a car, or heat your home, you are using energy that was extracted, transported, or maintained by these divers. But at what cost? They live inside steel chambers for weeks, breathing a special mix of gases to prevent their lungs from collapsing under extreme pressure. They work in total darkness, guided only by the beams of their helmet lights in an environment where visibility is near zero. They are completely cut off from their families, their friends, the surface world. They live in a pressurized steel prison miles from civilization. If something goes wrong, there is no escape, no quick rescue, only the crushing depths of the sea and the brutal physics of pressure. For them, the ocean is not a place of beauty, but a war zone, a constant battle between human ingenuity and nature's raw, relentless power. And sometimes, nature wins. The science of pressure. Why the ocean is a death trap. At sea level, life is easy. We breathe, we move, we exist without thinking about it. But deep underwater, everything changes. Pressure is not just a force. It is a silent, invisible monster that can crush metal, rupture lungs, and shatter bone. It is an enemy that does not sleep, does not wait, and does not hesitate to destroy anything that enters its domain unprepared. For every 10 meters, 33 feet below the surface, the pressure increases by 1 atmosphere. That means that at 100 meters, 328 feet, deep, a diver is experiencing a force 10 times greater than what they feel on land. At these depths, air becomes a poison. Oxygen turns toxic at high pressures, and nitrogen begins to intoxicate the brain, causing hallucinations, confusion, and paralysis, a deadly phenomenon known as nitrogen narcosis. Metal bends like paper. Ordinary materials cannot withstand the crushing force of the deep, requiring submarines and diving suits to be made of high-strength alloys that can endure the ocean's grip. One wrong move can end a life. If a diver ascends too quickly, the gases dissolved in their blood, primarily nitrogen and helium, begin to expand. But without proper decompression, these gases don't escape naturally. Instead, they explode inside the body, causing one of the most feared conditions in diving: decompression sickness. The horror of decompression sickness. The bends. Imagine a billion tiny needles piercing your body all at once. Your blood, now filled with expanding gas bubbles, turns against you. Your joints lock up in unbearable pain. Your brain becomes disoriented, sluggish, unable to process what's happening. If bubbles form in your spine, you lose control of your limbs. If they reach your brain, you may experience sudden unconsciousness, seizures, or even death. Some divers describe it as fire burning inside their veins. Others say It feels like their bones are breaking from the inside out. Some never even realize what's happening. They simply lose consciousness mid-ascent, never to wake up again. If untreated, decompression sickness can be fatal in minutes. And yet, these dangers are just another day at work for saturation divers. The ultimate solution: saturation diving. To prevent this, the technique of saturation diving was developed, an engineering breakthrough that allows humans to live at high pressure for weeks at a time, eliminating the need for dangerous repeated decompressions. Instead of diving down and coming up every day, saturation divers descend once and stay there. For weeks, they live in pressurized chambers, where their bodies become fully saturated with the gases they breathe. Their tissues, blood, and lungs adapt to the intense pressure, allowing them to work at extreme depths without risk, as long as they remain at that pressure. When their assignment ends, they undergo a single, slow decompression process inside a hyperbaric chamber, a process that can take several days, carefully allowing the gases in their bodies to safely escape. This system is what allows the oil and gas industry to operate in the deepest parts of the ocean, pushing human endurance to its absolute limits. And it was exactly this system that was being used on the Byford Dolphin, one of the largest offshore drilling platforms in the world. A platform that, in November 1983, would become the site of one of the most violent decompression incidents ever recorded. The Byford Dolphin, a floating steel fortress. The Byford Dolphin was an offshore drilling rig stationed in the North Sea, between the United Kingdom and Norway. It was built in 1974 by Aker Engineering in Oslo, weighing a massive 3,000 tons and operated by over 100 personnel. Its mission? To drill deep beneath the ocean floor, extracting valuable natural gas from the Frigg gas field, a vast, high-pressure reservoir of energy locked beneath layers of rock and water. The platform was a behemoth, designed to withstand brutal storms, freezing temperatures, and the relentless forces of the North Sea. But even the most advanced machines in the world are only as strong as their smallest components. And on one fateful night, a single mistake, a moment of miscalculation, would set off a chain reaction that no one could stop. November 5th, 1983. The night everything changed. The night began like any other. Two British divers, Edding Howard and Roy Lucas, were resting inside decompression chamber 2, waiting to begin the long process of returning to normal atmospheric pressure. Two Norwegian divers, Bjørn Bergersen and Truls Hellevik, had just returned from the ocean floor in a pressurized diving bell, guided by two operators, William Cramond and Martin Sanders. Their job was almost over. All they had to do was transfer safely from the diving bell to the decompression chambers, a routine procedure they had done dozens of times before. But this time, something was different. This time, something went horribly, horribly wrong. And in less than a second, their world would be torn apart. The diving bell had reached the surface, slowly lifted from the freezing depths of the North Sea. Inside, two Norwegian divers, Bjørn Bergersen and Truls Hellevik, were ready to complete the final step of their mission, transferring back into the pressurized chambers where their British colleagues, Edding Howard and Roy Lucas, were already resting. The operation was routine, something they had done countless times before. Every move, every action followed strict protocols, developed over decades of trial and error in one of the world's most dangerous professions. Everything was about control. Control over pressure, control over timing, control over every single variable that could mean the difference between life and death. And on that early morning of November 5th, 1983, It seemed like another seamless transition was underway. But beneath the surface of that apparent normalcy, something unseen was already slipping out of control. The diving bell had been secured to the decompression system, allowing Bergerson and Hellevick to begin their transition from the high-pressure environment of the bell into decompression chamber 1, where they would join Howard and Lucas. To ensure a smooth transfer, they had to pass through a pressurized tunnel, a short passage designed to maintain a perfect equilibrium between the different compartments. This equilibrium was everything. It was the invisible force keeping life and death in balance. Inside the control room, operators William Cramond and Martin Sanders were monitoring the process, overseeing each step of the transition. Their job was to execute precise pressure adjustments, to coordinate the exact moment when the diving bell could be safely detached from the system. But only once all hatches were sealed. A simple mistake, a miscalculation of even a fraction of a second, could set off a catastrophic chain reaction. And that is exactly what happened. Bergerson and Hellevick stepped into the pressurized tunnel, preparing to cross into decompression chamber 1. The protocol was clear. The hatch behind them must be sealed before any changes in pressure could be made. This was a fundamental rule, drilled into every saturation diver from the moment they entered the profession. The system was designed so that the chamber and tunnel remained at equal pressure until it was time for a slow, controlled decompression. But just as Hellevick was reaching to close the hatch, something went wrong. In an instant, the diving bell was prematurely detached from the system. The clamp that was holding it in place, the only thing maintaining the delicate balance of pressure, was released before the tunnel had been properly sealed. What happened next was unimaginable. The moment the diving bell detached, the pressure inside the tunnel and the decompression chambers collapsed. The system went from 9 atmospheres of pressure to just 1 in less than a second. And with that sudden shift, the ocean's invisible force was unleashed with violent, unstoppable power. For anyone inside the system, there was no time to react, no time to process what was happening, no time to feel fear, no time to escape. The air inside the tunnel and chambers didn't just escape. It erupted outward with an intensity beyond anything the human body was designed to endure. The decompression event was so powerful that it propelled the diving bell away from the system as if it had been fired from a cannon. The force slammed into the 2 operators, throwing them backwards with such speed and violence that they barely survived the impact. But the real horror was happening inside the decompression system. For the 4 divers trapped inside, the sudden pressure drop was beyond comprehension. The laws of physics took over in a way no human body could withstand. The nitrogen and helium that had been dissolved into their bloodstreams over weeks of saturation, diving instantly expanded. Not gradually, not over minutes or hours, but in an explosive burst of biological chaos. Inside decompression chamber 2, where Howard and Lucas had been resting, their bodies were subjected to an event that defied imagination. The rapid expansion of gases inside their veins and arteries caused a catastrophic internal reaction, their blood turning against them in an instant. The sheer speed of the pressure change forced the very molecules inside their bodies to react unpredictably, leading to physiological effects that scientists would later struggle to comprehend. In the transfer tunnel, Hellevick had been caught in the worst possible position. He had been closest to the sudden decompression event, standing just as the diving bell was detached, leaving him directly in the path of the immense pressure shift. The force was so intense that his entire body was subjected to an unnatural expansion of gases. The effects were so extreme that later reports from investigators would describe what happened to him with a level of precision that bordered on the surreal. The decompression event was not just violent, It was so precisely destructive that Hellevik's internal organs were displaced with surgical-like precision, as if they had been removed by an unseen force. The currents of air rushing out of the chamber forced his body through a partially open hatch, compressing his form into an opening far smaller than human anatomy should allow. The investigators later compared it to a vacuum force so powerful it defied the natural limits of the human body. Howard, Lucas, and Bergerson suffered an equally terrifying fate. Their blood, now filled with rapidly expanding gases, was pushed beyond its physical capacity, causing their circulatory systems to fail instantaneously. The same gases that had kept them alive under pressure became their executioners. When medical examiners studied their remains, they discovered strange, unnatural formations inside their arteries and veins, pockets of white, solid material, blocking major blood vessels. At first, there was confusion. What was this substance? Why was it there? Then came the realization it was solidified proteins. The proteins in their blood had literally coagulated into solid masses, a process triggered by the rapid heating effect of sudden decompression. It was as if, for a fraction of a second, their blood had boiled inside their bodies before collapsing back into solid form. No one inside the chambers had survived. By the time rescuers arrived, the Byford Dolphin decompression system was a scene of incomprehensible destruction. The operators who had been thrown by the explosion were barely alive. Martin Sanders survived with severe injuries. William Cramond, the other operator, succumbed to his injuries on the way to the hospital. The 5 others, 4 divers and 1 operator, had perished in a way so extreme that even veteran forensic examiners struggled to describe it. There had been no warning, no alarm, no chance to react. The investigation that followed would seek answers, but one fact remained undeniable. The Byford Dolphin accident had exposed one of the greatest weaknesses in saturation diving technology. And now, the world wanted to know how it could have happened, and who was to blame. The aftermath of the Byford Dolphin incident was a scene of devastation beyond comprehension. The decompression system, designed to be a safe transition zone between the deep ocean and the surface world, had been reduced to a tomb. Inside the chambers, nothing resembled human anatomy anymore. The force of the decompression had reshaped bodies in unnatural ways, twisting the laws of physics into something terrifyingly real. Investigators were stunned, not just by the sheer power of what had happened, but by the precise brutality of it. Forensic teams who arrived at the scene had no precedent for what they found. The decompression event had occurred so violently and so instantly that the bodies showed unusual, near-surgical effects. It was as if something inhuman had swept through the chamber, altering the very structure of the men inside. Even more chilling was what the autopsy reports revealed. The formation of white, solid material in the veins and arteries, protein clusters that had coagulated at an unnatural speed, was something forensic scientists struggled to explain. The only logical conclusion was that the sudden pressure drop had caused the proteins in their blood to solidify almost instantly, as if their bodies had experienced a momentary flash boil from the inside out. For the investigators, this wasn't just another industrial accident. It was a phenomenon, a case unlike anything seen before. The extreme decompression event had created conditions so violent that it pushed the boundaries of what the human body could endure, leaving behind evidence that bordered on the surreal. As reports were compiled, one question remained unanswered. How could this have happened? It was clear that the diving bell had been released too soon, but was it human error, mechanical failure, or something more sinister? The initial reaction from the industry was to downplay the event, treating it as an unfortunate but isolated incident. But the families of the victims weren't satisfied with corporate explanations. They wanted the truth. The investigation into the Byford Dolphin disaster was about to take a turn. The initial inquiry pointed to one primary cause: human error. According to the report, the incident occurred because operator William Cramond had prematurely released the diving bell clamp before the system had been fully sealed. This, the report stated, had caused the instant decompression event, leading to the deaths of the 4 divers and, later, Cramond himself. The conclusion seemed straightforward: a tragic mistake caused by a split-second lapse in procedure. But something felt wrong. There were whispers, murmurs among divers, engineers, and those familiar with the deep-sea industry, that there was more to the story. For one, why had the diving system lacked basic safety features that could have prevented the clamp from being released too soon? And then there was the timing of the clamp release. Why had Cramond, an experienced operator, made such a fundamental mistake? Was it really just fatigue? Or had something else interfered? Then came another disturbing revelation. Cramond had been working for over 13 hours straight at the time of the incident. Fatigue in high-risk jobs is as dangerous as any technical failure. Could exhaustion have played a role? And if so, was the real cause of the disaster deeper than just one man's mistake? As these questions surfaced, the families of the divers began pressuring authorities for a deeper investigation. And what they discovered was far more unsettling than anyone had anticipated. For years before the accident, the Norwegian petroleum regulators had been warning about safety issues in offshore platforms, including those involving saturation diving systems. One of the most critical concerns? The Byford Dolphin's decompression system lacked safety interlocks and pressure monitoring safeguards, features that other rigs had already implemented. These features could have prevented the premature release of the diving bell. And yet, they had never been installed. The question was, why? The answer was the same as it often is in industrial disasters: money, time, efficiency. Adding safety interlocks would have slowed down operations and required costly upgrades. Instead, the rig operated with outdated systems, leaving everything in the hands of human judgment. A decision that, on that night in November 1983, had led to one of the most horrifying accidents in diving history. But the most disturbing discovery came nearly 2 decades later. In 2008, after years of legal battles, a new report surfaced, and in it was evidence suggesting that the original investigation had concealed critical information. According to this report, the diving bell's clamp may have malfunctioned, not been released by Cramond at all. This changed everything. The new findings threw doubt over the entire official story. If the clamp had malfunctioned, then Cramond had been wrongly blamed. For the families, this revelation was both a relief and an outrage. Relief that their loved ones hadn't died because of a simple mistake. Outrage that the truth had been buried for decades. Legal action was taken against Dolphin Drilling, the company operating the platform, and the Norwegian government. The North Sea Divers Alliance, a coalition formed by families and industry advocates, demanded accountability. After years of courtroom battles, financial compensation was finally awarded. But the Norwegian government's final stance was chilling. The state does not deny that divers were injured as a result of petroleum activity in the North Sea. The state acknowledges moral and political responsibility, but not legal responsibility. It was a statement that left many questions unanswered. Who had really been responsible? Had the diving system malfunctioned due to outdated equipment? Or had Cramond truly made a mistake? And why had the report suggesting mechanical failure been buried for years? In the aftermath of the disaster, saturation diving protocols were re-evaluated, new safety measures were introduced, more advanced decompression systems with fail-safes and safety interlocks, became industry standard. But for those who work in deep-sea environments, the Byford Dolphin disaster is still a warning. Saturation diving remains one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet. Even today, divers who descend into the abyss know that the line between survival and catastrophe is razor thin. One wrong move, one moment of oversight, one malfunction, and the ocean will take them. The Byford Dolphin disaster was not the first extreme decompression event in history, but it was the one that shook the world. A case so horrifying, so surreal, that it still stands as a grim reminder of the dangers hidden in the depths. For those who work in the abyss, the lesson is clear. The ocean has no mercy, and when it claims you, it does not give you back.